Aua waira te one tapu ka hura tangata auta te turaki atu ki tangata atai, ka hura tangata atai te turaki atu ki tangata auta, pera hoki rā te kōrepe nui, te kōrepe roa, te wāhiawa, te toitoia wā, whakamau wā tamaki te ara, whakamoe tamaki te ara, no tū norongo, whanno, haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. Ko te wehiki ai a te wāhingaro, a te timatanga te whakaotinga o ngā mea katoa, rātou te kāhui wairua, ko mena tura ki te pōhaere, haere atu rā, hoki mai no rā ngā rārangi kōrero ki a tātou, a te hunga ora, kua pai nei, nau mai, piki mai, kake mai ki tō tātou whare kōrero, a matihiko nei, te kaupapa o te rā. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. E te whānau, my name is Kawuti Waitford and it is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the team. This webinar is presented as part of the Poipoia Ngā Tamariki Nurture Our Children project, which is hosted by Tu Tama Wahine of Taranaki Inc and funded by Cure Kids and a Better Start National Science Challenge. A key objective of the project is to inform the wider debate and activities that are currently at the fore of issues surrounding wellbeing for tamariki. Today you'll hear from two presenters, Awhina and Ngaropi Cameron. Both Ngaropi and Awhina whakapapa te Ngāti Mutunga, Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairoa and Te Atiawa Nuitonu. They live and work in their Taranaki homelands, working within the kaupapa of Tu Tama Wahine o Taranaki, a Taranaki Tangata Whenua Development and Liberation Service. The focus of their shared presentation will be in relation to the research project He Mokopuna, He Tupuna, a Taranaki-based research project that sought to explore knowledge related to tikanga and mātauranga Māori understandings of child-rearing philosophies and practices. So before we start our webinar, a little housekeeping. Today's webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, including Q&A. The webinar will be recorded and loaded onto the websites, so you can listen again later or share with others. All audience members will be automatically muted throughout the session. And of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. Please submit any questions that may come up for you using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom window, not the chat box, as we all might probably be used to using. Hoi anō te whānau tēnei rā te mihi te whakatau nei a koutou, nau mai, haere mai, a whakatau mai. Kei aku raukura kōtuku o Taranaki Maunga e Awhina e Ngaropi, anei te rākau koro kia kaurua, tēnā kōrua, kia ora mai.
Tēnā koe Kawuti. O tira, tēnei te mihi kia koe i tuwhera tō tātou nei hui, i tēnei rangi. Tautokona ngā mei, ko mea i tēnei wā. O tira kia kaue mahu e tētai ki waho me ki ngā hau e whā, tēnā koutou katoa. He uri e nei, no Taranaki, no te maunga titohia e mihi atu nei kia koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou. As Kawuti has mentioned in his opening kōrero this morning, the webinar today is in relation to Poipoia Ngā Mokopuna, to nurture our children. And firstly, I want to also acknowledge the support that Better Start Science Challenge is providing us by enabling us to carry on with this research. And also Cure Kids. It's a wonderful opportunity for our organisation, not an opportunity that we often have as a community provider and as a kaupapa Māori organisation. It's a relationship that we absolutely are honoured to be in partnership with. So the webinar today is myself and Ngaropi. We're simple practitioners, so there's no share screen in terms of, I'll flick over to here, we'll just simply swap seats and I'll slide to the left. So we have quite a bit to go through, and Ngaropi often has a few more slides than me, so I'll try and get through mine quite quickly and set the scene a little bit in relation to the research that we do. As Kawuti mentioned, the webinar is in relation to dissemination activities to help share research-based knowledge in formats and forms that are perhaps a little bit more accessible to whānau and practitioners who work with children. And so we've chosen to talk a little bit about some research that we undertook in relation to He Mokopuna, He Tupuna. And I'm just going to start the screen share so that we can get into that presentation. One moment. aroha mai. There are some things that are being out of my sight at the moment. Here we go. Hopefully that's all going and everyone can see what I'm talking about. So he Mokopuna, he Tupuna. This was a research project undertaken by Tu Tama Wahine. It was specific to Taranaki and was carried out with the support of a range of people in whānau from across our community. They shared their time, their stories, their mātauranga in relation to traditional and contemporary childbearing practices within Taranaki. The project team included Professor Leone Pihama, Ngaropi, Rawania, Leatherby Toya, and myself. So today we've chosen to open up the webinar with this image. This is an image of our karaua, Uncle Tiki as we know him, but his actual name is Tiki Tu Te Rangi Raumati. We've chosen to open up the webinar today with this image because it was actually Uncle Tiki in the early, late 2000s that supported the organisation to reflect on some of the messaging and the promotional materials, some of the national strategies of that time that really referred to Tamaiti as taonga. He challenged us to think differently and be careful about the use of the word taonga in relation to children, not because Māori whakaaro and understanding, you know, which we know refers to our absolute treasured ones, our most sacred relationships, but because he was concerned at the misappropriation of this term by really the dominant stream New Zealand. And the complete, really, I guess, distrust of a society that, in his view, commodifies everything. A society that really destroys, discards, trades, and sells taonga. You know, certainly all those things that he understood to be sacred to his people, to our people, were not treasured or safe from misuse or abuse. And so he didn't agree with the children being referred to as objects or things. So within the demonstrated context and history of our dominant, you know, stream society within New Zealand. And it was his belief that the entire positioning of the way of the way we think and refer to tamariki, Mokopuna, needed to change. And so at the time, with the release of the UNICEF report, Kids Missing Out, and actually a number of reports at that time and since then, that you know, groups like the Child Poverty Action Group and others, it has been and was, you know, abundantly evident that there were a large and growing numbers of tamariki within Aotearoa that were living within a context of dysfunction and poverty, and really living within a system that devalued them. And so this, you know, situation is and was unacceptable. And so, you know, what is also unacceptable is the large number of tamariki that experience neglect, abuse, and, you know, or live in a context of family violence. And so the numerous reports then and since then related to poverty and those related to abuse and violence within whānau highlight a wider societal issue with how tamariki are positioned. He Mokopuna, he Tupuna reminds us that the lives of our future generations must be accorded more status within Aotearoa society. Only then will we see true and, you know, interventions happening at the levels of whānau, hapu, iwi, community and government agencies. And so this photo has many elements that we consider contribute to Māori wellbeing. Uncle Tiki with his 5 great-grand-nephews. The image contains whakapapa of Te Hunga Ora, Tupuna Karaua, Mokopuna. It has Maunga Taranaki, very small there in the background. It's a source of mana and pride, our maunga, and of course a tohu of iwi and hapu identity. This image is taken in our iwi urupa, our whānau burial grounds, a very old part of those grounds. And so it contains whakapapa continuity and history. So, you know, this image speaks of a sense of belonging, connectedness, tūranga waiwai, he mokopuna, he tupuna. You know, a lot of what we do at Tu Tama Wahine would be defined as service provision, of filling the void and addressing the needs of whānau. But we know that application alone, service provision alone, will only get us so far. And this is why we have chosen to undertake various research projects within the organisation to better understand and define our own context and our own solutions. Research and its practical application, we have found, can be a symbiotic relationship within an organisation like ours, where each has an influence and actually a benefit to the other. This is a very simplistic image to symbolise this relationship and the centre for change and the transformation that can occur. But what it really looks like in a community application and within a kaupapa Māori organisation such as ours is something like this. So, you know, there are often no straight lines. It's layers of connections, layers of influence. You know, some things connect, others, you know, do not. It sits within a context of, you know, organised chaos. And so before we go into the research, actually, he mokopuna tupuna itself, we thought that it was firstly important to have an understanding of this context, to understand who and what are, you know, who and what, and who, what we are and what we do at Tu Tama Wahine. So as an organisation, up there on the screen, you can see our plan and our goals. But, you know, in summary, really, Tu Tama Wahine has a deep commitment to help whānau transformation, you know, to transform their lives. And what we mean by that is really to be fully in charge of and in control of their lives. Unfortunately, actually, a lot of our time, and I think far too much of our time, is taken up in dealing with things like this. It's taken up in trying to create safety for whānau and tamariki across our community. This slide shows some family harm statistics for Taranaki just from last month. So these are the June statistics for our area, June 2022. These figures relate to the family harm incidents reported to the police across Taranaki, sort of broken up into our various communities. And I wanted to show this table because, one, so that we can understand the magnitude of the issues in relation to family harm, but also because it highlights some interesting data, I think. I think what's interesting when you drill down into some of these statistics is that you can see that Māori are just as likely, if not more likely, to be the victims of family violence. And those are the stats shown in red. In some areas, almost twice as likely to be the kaimamai, the victim, as opposed to being the kaipatungako, the perpetrator. So now I know that this doesn't take into account the unreported incidences, But I would also say that it doesn't even scratch the surface of capturing the accurate numbers in relation to the total persons impacted by violence, so all the kaimamai, let alone the tamariki impacted by family harm. Yeah, as an organisation, there's some organisational stats. I'm just going to get through these quite quickly. So we've got a bit of work to do, and not just with our own, and as shown in these organisational statistics. We don't have the luxury of focusing our attention in just one area, and actually, when it comes to whānau and community, nor should we. We currently provide a variety of community-based development and social justice services designed to collectively enhance whānau wellbeing, and those are some of the main service areas. Individuals and tamariki, they come with a whānau attached, and whānau have the potential for development in many areas. These are the 10 main areas of need and development that whānau may present with to the organisation. And presenting issues may vary. Whānau priorities can change, components are interchangeable. Not every whānau requires assistance with all these areas. And we all know nothing happens in a linear process, one thing after the other. But this is, really to say, regardless, every kaimahi, regardless of contract program activities or their, work role, is required to assess and explore all the areas of development, because if we don't, then we are doing those whānau and their mokopuna, our mokopuna, a disservice. For the past 33 years, we've been organising, planning and implementing different approaches to whānau wellbeing. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. We've found often anything can fit into a circle in the organisation. What we've found is that the process of healing is one of reorganisation, of reintegration, harmonisation of things that have come apart. And how do we go about that as, in the organisation? Well, healing, recovery, development, aka rongoa, doesn't happen in isolation. The work that we undertake with whānau is around a much more broader idea of healing. It's about a restoration of a sense of identity, pride, education, and modelling of traditional cultural constructs, such as these. We're engaged in a continual process of re-education, addressing physical, emotional, historical abuse, which ties into many areas of work. And these may be medicinal therapies, they may be cultural and behavioural education, social assistance, and Indigenous development. Are one of a series of tools we may utilise to create whānau wellbeing. And all of these approaches are based upon kaupapa Māori philosophies and values. Ngaropi is going to drill down a little bit more and actually get into the detail around he Mokopuna, he Tupuna. So that's me. I'm just giving a context to the organisation and actually how does research work in a community organisation such as ours. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. A bit of a musical chairs happening. Kia ora Awhina, thank you. Getting organised. Tēnā koutou ko Ngaropi ahau. Kei te mitina kia koutou katoa e noho nei e wharongo mai kia maua. So, Taranaki Māori have experienced a unique colonial history. which has resulted in poor health, education, housing, and social status. And the economic, political, and social trauma not only dispossessed hapu of land and wealth, but severely impacted how mātauranga was conveyed across generations. Now, this dispossession disrupted the safety mechanisms which had placed well-being of Tamariki Mokopuna at the centre of community life. There were clear safety mechanisms in place. So reclaiming and revitalising traditional knowledge and wisdom of Tupuna that clearly communicates the position and status of Tamariki Mokopuna within tikanga a Taranaki is important, because we can apply that mātauranga to the context of whānau lives today. Now, it's important to give context and understanding for whānau, in particular wahine Māori. You just heard some of those statistics about how insidiously destructive the imposition on us of the concept and practice of the nuclear family structure has been. The outlook being is to encourage whānau Māori back to learning about the benefits of accountable child raising in a collective manner, where responsibility is supported and shared. You know, this will help reposition tamariki back into the centre, where responsibility is shared. So our guiding whakatauki for the organisation is he tupuna he mokopuna. Mā wai I whakaki ngā whāwharua o ngā mātua tupuna. Mā a tātou mokopuna, he mokopuna he tupuna. So this whakatauki provides us with a cultural framework to understand the positioning of Tamariki Mokopuna in Te Ao Māori, and to encourage kaimahi, our workers, our clinicians, practitioners, to strive to improve healing outcomes that advocate for the return of Tamariki Mokopuna to the centre of community life. Now, the whakatauki draws us to the essence of intergenerational whakapapa relationships, because it asserts that we are all Mokopuna and we are all Tupuna. All grandchildren in time become grandparents, and each generation links through whakapapa to each other, reflecting our ancestral lines, thus maintaining sacred bonds, sacred connections. So here's this quote from Dr. Rangi Maria Rose Pere restates that a grandchild is very precious, extremely precious. They are a fountain, a pool of water for ancestral knowledge, and an everlasting reflection of those who have gone before. We are all grandchildren, as are our ancestors. So thus Rose Pere reaffirms the sacred bonds between Tupuna and Mokopuna, and embedded again within the concept is that tamariki, like Tupuna, must be treated with dignity and respect. So, you know, in fact, early European descriptions of how tamariki were treated was with reverence, veneration, reverence and veneration. They stopped short of writing worshipped, but it's implied in some accounts. So although the project was located in Te Ao Māori, it has implications for non-Māori. There continues to be a need for more in-depth examination and further dismantling of the misguided, misogynist and child abusive practices imported into Aotearoa alongside the structured racism of colonisation. Te Ao Māori was and still is, a strength-based culture. It was not and is not a deficit-based culture, but we are always pushing back against a culture that is deficit-based, is focused on deficits. But, you know, one of the things they seem totally incapable of is addressing their own deficits and ones that have been created by them. So, you know, it is essential that the lives of our future generations are accorded more status within society. If their status improves, then I believe that we will begin to see more authentic, informed prevention and intervention approaches happening on multiple levels, just as Awhina has said, on individual whānau, hapu, iwi, community and government agencies. You know, because in the end, at the end of the day, we will all see that perhaps one of the only things that we have in common as the two cultures is that we are born as mokopuna of someone, and when we die, we die as mokopuna of someone. So participants in the project readily identify disruptions. Statements like, if they want the land, they will take the land. If they want the work, they will take the work. This resulted in disconnections from marae, from urupa, from whakapapa, from access to tikanga, and the transmission of knowledge between generations was disrupted. So alongside this, participants talked about the lack, not just the lack of, but also the loss of kaumātua, which was resulted in further knowledge and wisdom gaps, and also the loss of exemplars, models for which tamariki can, you know, emanate, can follow and model themselves upon. The onset of smacking to teach children, or to, you know, a short, sharp lesson to get it done, was traceable. Participants were able to trace it in their own families in the past 3 generations. It was traceable. So alongside that, it was also aligned beside significant changes that were happening, that within the transmission of te reo and tikanga. Now, whānau drew connections between increased whānau violence and child abuse from all of the above, as well as the violence experienced by grandparents at school to stop them speaking te reo. These aspects is very well documented throughout the motu. Now, the strengths highlighted were particularly grouped around growing up in intergenerational households where whanaungatanga and respect across generations was the norm, and where collective responsibility and obligations were reciprocal in nature, where working together, mahitahi, was an enriching experience. And all of this played a part and everybody made a contribution to whānau well-being. It all played a part in whānau well-being. The place of grandparents cannot be overstated. In fact, it was compelling throughout the project. Grandparent relationship was considered critical to well-being of tamariki and Mokopuna, but was also considered critical for the well-being of the whānau as a whole. Now, grandparents, they were described as providing supportive and caring environment, a sense of security, feeling nurtured. They were identified by many as the first teachers, and they also reflected and modelled values, behaviour, etiquette, not just at home, but at the marae, which tamariki and Mokopuna were encouraged to emanate. Now, in turn, tamariki supported Tupuna, supported elders, and they were encouraged to care for elders as not just elders, but also to help, support and care for their taina, their younger siblings. So it was considered that there was no difference between caring for an elder, a young child or a baby. So within this this cluster, you know, things that were clustered around was also naming a person, ngā hononga, and it was considered important to do this because it maintained intergenerational links. It strengthened whānau connections, and it was a means to pass on knowledge and respect for that tupuna, and also carried a sense of honour and pride. So taurima was also spoken about quite often. This is still carried out in Taranaki today. This is a practice we still do. Taurima is a Taranaki kupu to take care of, to feed or to nurture a child. Nurture a child who's not your birth child, but who you are caring for through a whānau hapu iwi, a Māori arrangement. And the arrangement could be temporary or could be permanent, but what was important was nurturing and caring for the well-being of the child. As I said, this practice continues today. So alongside taurima, tuakana-taina relationships, you know, this caring for each other, sharing and supporting each other, supporting learning, those teaching instruction moments. And it was also around an expression of manaakitanga within whānau. So the manaakitanga was also expressed in a non-violent philosophy, which was advocated by not imposing hurt on others. And if we think about that, we look at that, we can see that this is also about reaffirming that tamariki were treated respectfully, and it reaffirmed their mana. Wairuatanga, spiritual knowledge and karakia were normal. It was considered the norm. It was a natural part of daily life alongside acknowledgement of a deeper connection to te Aotearoa, te Taiao, as was learning to live a balanced life in line with the seasons and environment. So what was obvious was how whānau provided a structure by which protection and safety of tamariki mokopuna could be addressed. Sorry, I'm just catching up with myself. So whānau provided a structure. It ensured protection and safety. And by being raised in intergenerational households and participating in marae life, this meant that isolation via the nuclear family construct was prevented. And tamariki learned a values-based, respectful way to live and the importance of whānau relationships. So whānau Māori are the solution. Okay, Māori are the solution. Okay, we are not the problem. And although we have to be honest here, we can be problematic, but so can anybody. But whānau are the solution. We have a collective responsibility to re-examine and reclaim tupuna practice aspects that can be redeveloped and applied to help rebalance our whānau. So to that end, Tu Tama Wahine has engaged in developing localised practice tools and frameworks, and with the intention being to make a contribution to assist self-determination solutions by crafting mātauranga practice tools which are practical and can be utilised by the community to enhance whānau recovery, whānau transformation, or we can, you know, some of our young ones would just say a makeover, opportunities, okay? So utilising these tools to help whānau to clarify their own statement of reality. This is not about kaumahi, you know, perception of that whānau's reality. These tools are to support the whānau to clarify their own statement of reality. So importantly, the validation and endorsement of te reo rangatira, te ao Māori, values and frameworks is vital. And it's vital for several reasons. So that whānau become familiar with them. Whānau become familiar with them. We're very detached from tikanga at the moment. And the other reason is so that they become confident that they are legitimate, they are solid, they are innovative and valid concepts that can support and maintain behaviour reclamation and transformation. This is just a closer up view of that. This is our sorted tool. Now, Professor Michelle Johnson-Jennings, you know, Professor Karina Walters, Bonnie Duran, Leonie Pihama, Tuhiwai Smith, Moana Jackson have all reminded us that just as trauma has been embedded in our DNA, also embedded is the memory of Tupuna aroha for their Mokopuna. The same way that whenua retains memory of Tupuna presence. Otherwise, why do we have Papatūnuku and Te Ukaipo? Those memories are also within our DNA. Tupuna have left us many gifts, and they've left us a lot to leverage from, and it is now our responsibility to activate te puna waihanga, the creative pathways to utilise their gifts, these taonga. So the tool you've been just looking at is, we just sort of call that the S tool. You know, it's like, let's get sorted. So this is a wipeable, it's a reusable, and it's a whānau planning tool. It is deliberately designed to be user-friendly. So this is to ensure both whānau and practitioners can use it in a variety of situations and contexts. It is an organising, planning, action tool. And, you know, it is a simple visual reminder that our tupuna existed, lived in, and lived as independent nations of strategists. They strategise to address all manner of crises, either immediate, long-term, short-term, intergenerational, and across continents of water, salt water. You know, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa is a continent. It just happens to be water. This has a tool, has a kōrero that goes with it about the things that many of us no longer do. It's plan and strategize. It's a simple tool, it's usable, and actually children love it. So just want to show you another one that we use. So this one is intended to renormalize planning and collective strategic action within whānau, okay? It's by providing a resource that they can repeatedly apply themselves. And if desired, it's not required, you know, it can be done with a kaimahi, it can be done with a clinician, but it doesn't need them. So this tool here is to help whānau reflect and identify details that matter most to them, that make the most sense to them. The tool requires kaimahi to engage in different conversations with whānau. Have a look at the questioning. The conversations that can be centered on mana enhancing reflections, mana enhancing thinking and activities rather than problem solving, you know, or problems identified that need fixing. and is not saying ignore the problems. We've got the other tool to be looking at that. Okay, so we're not saying ignore them. They won't, because they won't go away. Okay, but this tool here is used in another way to draw out more of what is buried and what is there and what wants to come out. So this tool is a practical way to process progress thinking and actions that are self-identified priorities. Self-identified priorities, and can also strengthen positive aspects of whānau functioning. Okay. So I'm just going to leave that there, and I just thought if time allowed, we've got a few minutes, 5 minutes. Just quickly show you this. I want to just have a quick word about neurodiversity. Now I know it's a term that's now organised around, also captured, and used as a diagnostic tool for, you know, fetal alcohol, fetal drug, traumatic brain injury, Asperger's, autism. And it's a move away from the term neurodevelopment disorders, as it was, you know, that's inherently pathological. And this is a middle term, neurodiversity, a middle term between medical model and social model. But when I think about the term neurodiversity, I think the entire Māori nation was organised around neurodiversity. And this is why one of the reasons why Mokopuna were observed and watched for tohu, to see which tohu came from them, which came through them or with them. Now these tohu would guide elders to where Mokopuna would be channeled to learn to develop and refine that strengths that were already present in them, strengths that could contribute to innovation and new knowledge, strength-based culture. And as Naomi Simmons said in the last webinar, there is a deep oncology of emotional expression embedded in Te Ao Māori, Ngā Kari Aroto. Emotional expression that is not present in Te Ao Pākehā to that extent. Emotional language memory was embedded within a child's auditory memory when born because of the practice of reciting whakapapa, hapu, history, oriori, celestial knowledge before they were born. Learning and education began at maternal consciousness of pregnancy. It didn't start when they were born or a year old or 5 years old. And an example of this can be found in the documentary Te Reo Te Whenua, Voices of the Land, where Richard Nuns spoke about the tumutumutu, a tūhoi instrument that was played over baby while the fontanelle was still open. And this is to support the clearing of pathways for absorbing knowledge, learning and education, and to be receptive to new knowledge. Because surely it was also to strengthen the development of auditory receptors and auditory memory, which determines and supports language development and speech. Practices using midi and musical instruments such as that only enhance neurological pathways for learning. And this was to help educate Mokopuna in all aspects of Te Ao Māori. And I just think, oh my God, we've been really dumbed down. But, you know, in conclusion, the place of our tamariki is a reflection of the aspirations of our tupuna. The mana of our Mokopuna is a reflection of the mana of our tupuna. If we live with these fundamentals as underpinning ways in which we understand our place in the world and the centrality of tamariki within the whānau, we will recover and we will get back in charge of our lives. Nō reira, rauranga te rama, tēnā koutou katoa. And kia ora, kawati.
Tēnā kōrua. Ienei, kororo rangatira. Rangatira te kaupapa, rangatira ngā whakaaro, rangatira te rangahau. It's so...
Ko mitu I konei. Ka mitu I te whakatauki, neki. He Mokopuna he tupuna, māua e whakaki ngā whawharua o ngā mātua tupuna. Mā o tātou Mokopuna, he Mokopuna he tupuna. Tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora e hoa. Aroa mai te. Te poro I ngā koro hono, tēnei te mihia atu kia koutou tira te kaupapa whānui. Can you hear me? can you fellas hear me? And now, one of the beautiful things that it reminded me of was, as a papa, I've been trying to rangahau exactly those things from our kāinga here. Michelle, I might just get you fellas to message in the chat to our tuahine here to ask them to turn their volume up. Kia ora, just in the background. And yeah, so one of the things that it reminds me of when I was growing up, we lived in a whānau, in a whare of 4 generations too, and tika tau, it was our tupuna who looked after us when my mum was away, and from that connection, those early connections with our grandparents, that formed a beautiful relationship going forward. Hoi anō. E te whānau, oh yep, can't quite hear. Pai ana, we'll just do a bit of a chat. Kei te pai. Shall. I'm not too sure what's going on in te whānau, but hoi anō. I just wanted to, if there was any last questions in te whānau, chuck them up into our Q&A, or into the chat even. If there's any whānau with any pātai, any pātai. And if we don't, if not, ka pai. Might just close there te whānau, as we have no further pātai, but hono mihi tonu ana kia tātou, mihi tonu ana ki te kaupapa, mihi ana ki ngā mahi nui e hiki nei koutou. Even if you fellas can't hear, ai a kutua hine, tēnei rā te mihi o te ngākau, kia kōrua, o tira kia koutou. Nā ringa i tērā, kia ka mihi atu, ka kapi ake ki te karakia, nā reira i runga i rā whakaro, unuhia te uru tapu nui kia wātea, kia māma, te hinengaro te ngākau, te wairua i te arataka tū ko i rā e rongo whakairia ki runga, kia tīna, haumi e hui e, tā e ki e. Tēnā tātou e te whānau katoa, kia ora.